It's about partnerships and being able to forge true partnerships with the state EDD, with LA Unified, with the LA Community Development Department, other services, the Community College District, and private employers, and being able to revision how we do our services. The other major reason is that we need to be able to look at our workforce system to be the city's workforce system. Even today, we only capture part of the work within the city, within our current workforce system. Our 17 providers have been great and have been really extraordinarily flexible, but there are certain things that they can't do without the city moving forward in a more coherent policy direction. As an example, our airports, our DWP, our ports, and their workforce work are still not under the auspices or highly coordinated with the Workforce Investment Board and CDD's efforts through many different attempts to do that. Our hope with the RFP is that we're able now to actually lay a flag in the ground that the Workforce Investment Board is the place where all workforce issues are actually discussed, that we actually have that coupled with economic development. And we've been moving in that direction in the last few years. So any new economic development project that's happening under our auspices, we've connected workforce to it. We have not been that successful all across the city, and often we're brought in at the tail end of the discussion. But we need to be able to actually revision our system. We need to be able to have a coherent investment amongst all parties that's supposed to be a part of the system. And we need to equalize the level of services. And as an example, we have EDD in some of our offices. We don't have EDD in other parts of our offices. Our Department of Social Services are non-existent in most of our offices. Department of Rehab, it varies by area. So these are things that we could only do if we coordinate the services in a comprehensive manner. We actually mandate the level of type of services we want to be able to see. And then secondly, we're able to secure the partnerships at a system level. And we're currently under that discussion. So those are the reasons why we need to move forward in terms of doing the RFP. Both Manny and Greg could answer some of the specifics of the how part.
Okay. Okay, would you guys like to add?
Yes. Mr. Chair, am I on? I am. I guess you're surprised at all three of us being here at one time. This is a
great
first for us.
It's a triple threat.
And we've got a great audience. I want to say I disagree with Robert on one thing. Our workforce centers can do anything.
Right.
They're a phenomenal bunch of providers. They've done a fabulous job, as Robert mentioned, in terms of putting us at the pinnacle of workforce service delivery in the country. But I want to add that we designed the system 14 years ago. And what we devolved upon them was based on an economy at that time. The economy has changed. It requires new innovation. And by the way, we actually went out to bid with most of the service delivery programs that we have at CDD. We did it with the Business Source Center. We bid that out. It's a brand new system. We did it with the youth system. And actually, the youth system that we have is now focused on dropout prevention and recovery. And it's funded with the same money that we're talking here. It's just categorical. It's Workforce Investment Act funds. So what we're trying to do is, again, redesign the system. We have this vision for where the system should go. And we're following the federal government's lead in terms of doing that. The Secretary has set aside money for innovation. As you know, we've engaged in innovation projects with an innovation fund. We've taken on sector initiatives, things that weren't in the original legislation, Workforce Investment Act legislation from the federal government, but are necessary because of the changing economy and the global economy. So where we are today is not in the position of criticizing any of our service deliverers, but trying to redesign the system, realizing, as Robert mentioned, that we need more partners, that we need a different approach to deal with what is now a really difficult situation in putting people back to work.
Okay, you want to?
Manny Chavez with CDD. Good morning, Councilman.
Good morning.
I do have the opportunity of actually managing this procurement process, and as part of that, the WIB actually convened a task force that met a number of times over the summer and in the fall to discuss the guiding principles that would essentially govern the procurement process. Approximately 5 meetings, the general public as well as our current service providers had the opportunity to provide input into what the forthcoming bid should look like. Following that, we moved forward and actually drafted the guiding principles and had those approved by the executive committee of the WIB, as well as we actually took the guiding principles to the full WIB for their consideration as well. Just in terms of process, if we were to receive your approval to go ahead and proceed with this RFP, we would plan on releasing as early as next week, contingent upon our being able to post this document and actually get it published in the local media, the fact that we're actually proposing to release the bid itself.
Okay. I have a few questions. I know Ms. Perry also has some questions, who's joined us in committee. We also have Mr. Parks, so we have a full quorum. And then we also have a couple speaker cards. So let me jump into my questions real quick. Can you detail a little bit the national climate? I mean, it's tough to prognosticate, but with the re-election of President Obama, with a split Congress, and with the so-called fiscal cliff facing us, what our expectations are in terms of if we have any indications of the funding of the workforce investment system, and also the consolidation, if you can fold into that answer towards everything towards a potential workforce investment fund that would take existing programs and put them in one.
So you want us to perform feats of legerdemain? I'll
Yes,
try.
exactly.
Robert and I just returned from a session in Washington where we discussed the possibility of a reauthorization of the Workforce Investment Act in whatever iteration. It doesn't seem like that will happen in light of what's going to happen with sequestration. So what we're expecting is probably cuts. I think everybody is, and we'll have to adjust to that. We actually think that having a competitive process will allow us to adjust a lot more easily. It's always difficult when you're going to be cut. So we're anticipating cuts. We don't anticipate that there will actually be a Workforce Investment Act. Quite frankly, again, the act expired a long time ago. It was a 5-year piece of legislation that was enacted 14 years ago. So we've been funded through the budget process. And when you consider the fact that Congress and the President are going to go through this daunting and this daunting process of figuring out where to cut, reducing the federal deficit, et cetera, they're not necessarily in favor of putting something in statute that would then come off the top in terms of the budget process. So we're anticipating that perhaps we will not have any legislation. Although I can speak to the attempts that have happened over the past 2 years, there has been legislation from both sides of the aisle. All speak to consolidation of programs because they're workforce development programs throughout the federal government. There are some with the Defense Department, with Health and Human Services, with labor, et cetera. So consolidation is probably the trend. Most likely there will be cuts and we'll have to adjust to them locally.
Anything you want to add?
Well, I would say the emphasis for the city should really be about being aggressive of looking at other sources of funding, not just WIA. And when we talk about Health and Human Services, where there's a large amount of money that's been going out on workforce training, generally we're not in a competitive position to receive those dollars.
Have we not competed for them, or we just have lost and tried to and lost?
The way that we've been situated is that we've been competing on an individual basis. So generally, center by center has been applying for money directly for a lot of RFPs. So MCS, did real well in receiving a grant, but it didn't benefit the system. Our emphasis in the future has really to be applying on behalf of the system, and also to coordinate the money at the federal level, and not wait for them to actually block grant the dollars, but for us to actually have a much broader vision of dollars that we can receive. The same goes true for veterans, and we've been doing a lot of work and discussion talking about veterans. But the dollars are running through the Veterans Administration, they're running through DOD, and we need to position ourselves to be able to receive those dollars as on behalf of the city and coordinate the money directly rather than applying as individual grant by individual grant and center by center.
So we being you, are you prepared to?
Yes.
So do we have a plan to do so?
Well, we were actually successful in terms of the youth system. Now, remember, we went out and bid the system out. We actually tripled the amount of young people that are going to be served by that system. And we put together the partnerships that were successful in getting us a grant, allowing us to compete for a $12 million grant, a Workforce Innovation Fund grant. So the Secretary, under WIA, never had any consideration for innovation grants. She put the money out believing that there needed to be a new approach. We competed with a new system, and we were successful.
So through your good work and the initiative that I've felt very strongly about, having a veterans coordinator for the first time in the city of Los Angeles, when we hire this person, I hope that we'll be aggressive with those veterans job training funds, because I think that is a critical piece. For we have, close to, I think it was something like 24,000 veterans returning home in the next year just in Los Angeles alone.
Yes. We're going to be reporting back to you. By the way, when we visited Washington, the entire meeting was about veteran services. We met with representatives from the Joint Chiefs of Staff as well.
Good.
So we're going to be coming back to you with some plan for that.
Okay. A few questions about the proposed RFP. Does this allow for a variety of different sized operators to be able to bid, small, medium, large, or do they have to be kind of at least of a certain cookie cutter size and above?
Actually, any organization, essentially nonprofit, for-profit, is eligible to apply. All we request is that they have demonstrated ability in managing a comparable sum of money. So we're actually looking to put out $1.1 million per center. So essentially, if they have experience in managing programs of that size.
So no, but we won't be looking at somebody who says, I can do $300,000 worth, or I can do $2 million worth. It's going to be equal sums pretty much.
Correct. We're looking to fund equally $1.1 million across the board.
The other thing, the report mentions that there's preference given to those organizations that are either own their own facilities or are in city-owned facilities. Can you walk me through that? And is that going to be a handicap for folks who don't own their own but are paying rent?
It could be. Well, over the years, we've seen the infrastructure costs in WorkSource remain relatively the same, consistent, and unfortunately they are high. We have cases where we're expending $250,000 on rent and related facilities. So the WIB has supported reducing our overall infrastructure costs. So those that obviously own their own facility charge us for depreciation and what have you. That benefits the system because we're able to serve more people or serve them more intensively and not spending those dollars on infrastructure costs. In terms of city facilities, we would love to have city facilities where we house these programs. Unfortunately, we simply don't. In the instance where we are able to locate a 10,000 square foot building that can accommodate a center, it would be great to actually put our contractors at those locations so we wouldn't be incurring those rental costs.
Mr. Chair, I'll give you an example. In one particular case, there is a WorkSource center that's spending over $300,000 for rent. When you consider the fact that we've also imposed, at your suggestion, or I should say at the council, the WIB, and the mayor's suggestion, as well as the controller's suggestion, that more money should go into training, because what we have is a low-skilled workforce that we need to elevate their skills. 25% of our money must be spent on training. So if you took the $300,000 from the 1.1 and then the 25%, which is going to go up in a number of years to 30%, there's not much money left. So what we want to do is provide as much services as we can with less of an emphasis on infrastructure, where we're paying so much rent that it becomes a system where we sustain simply the existence of the system without being able to serve more people.
To that end, I know that another requirement is to have a match of $600,000 for the 1.1, so that each center would actually have $1.7 million for job training and assistance and the operations. Has this requirement always been in place, and how does this affect contractors who would otherwise meet all the other RFP requirements but can't meet the match requirement?
It has not been in place as a requirement, but we do know that each of the agencies, as I mentioned before, do go and raise additional money. So it's never been coordinated, though, and what you ended up having generally was agencies that are not successful in raising money are usually in the areas with the highest need. And those that are in the areas that are maybe with a little bit less need or have the greater capacity have more dollars. So you get an uneven level of service throughout the city. So you'll have some centers that will be operating really with a $2.5–3 million budget of services for their community, and in another community will be just on the 100% city dollars.
So are you worried in those high-need areas that the match will prohibit some people from being able to?
No, because I do think, well, in two instances that what we've been in discussion is to actually us forge some of those partnerships on behalf of the system. And the way the system's designed now is that each of the centers are asked to go and do their own partnerships, say with EDD or with LA Unified or the Community College District.
Yep.
What we want to be able to do, and this is the discussions that we've been intently having over the last year, is to have discussions with EDD, with LA Unified, LA Community College District, DPSS, and Department of Rehab, so that we could have equal service in each of those facilities, and those will count as a part of the actual dollar match.
Mr. Chair, we've never paid the full freight for these work-source centers. These operators have been phenomenal. They've leveraged funding to, quite frankly, stretch the city's contribution. So when we talk about 1.1, they've been leveraging resources as nonprofits. We've never paid the full freight. Now, again, there are opportunities for partnership. If 30% or 25% has to be spent on training, you can then enter into a relationship with, say, the adult education system, with the community college system, and leverage the training on that side, because they're going to be anxious for that 25%.
Absolutely.
That's going to count towards the leveraging.
Okay. Last question before turning over to Ms. Perry is pretty simple one. Why did it take 14 years?
Well, what we've done is actually use the Baldrige process and allows us to certify agencies to stay within the system. And we've actually had these huge fluctuations in funding. When we had major cuts about 8 years ago, then we had a huge increase for, thank God for Obama and Obama dollars through ARA. And then now we're on the downside, on the decline. So during that instability of funding, it wasn't the right time. Secondly, there's always been the pushback of not to do an RFP for many different reasons. Current providers, of course, it's much easier not to go out to an RFP. And then I think third has been really on our side of having the capacity and the ability to do it. As Greg mentioned earlier, over the last 3 years, we've actually have done the RFPs of major systems. When we did the Family Source system, we were doing a new RFP. That's something that hadn't been done in about 15 years, and we did it 3 years ago. The Business Source hadn't been done in a number of years. The Youth Source had been about 4 years. So now it's the right time, and we have the right focus to be able to do it now. I also will note that the Controller's report had, as one of their recommendations, has strongly recommended to do it. The Council has passed it out as part of the CAO report for the last 2 years, asking us to do it, and so now is the right time.
The other thing, Mr. Chair, quite frankly, is we're slow to react. Again, I go back 14 years. The system was designed when there was a labor shortage. The entire system, the intent of the system was to move people quickly into jobs because employers were actually short of labor. This recession has taught us some lessons. Now, to compete, we have to train people and make sure, that's why we engaged in those sector initiatives, to make sure that they have the skills that are necessary to transition into certain industries that are likely to grow and create jobs. We've been slow at doing it. This recession has taught us many lessons, and we need to redesign from a system that was there for, quite frankly, as a primarily a labor exchange system to get people into work quickly, to one where we're going to have to focus on training, partnerships, leveraging money, and we don't anticipate that we're going to have an abundance of money.
Thank you. And I know a lot of folks are here for the next meeting of the City Council, but certainly some of those sector initiatives, which will be of interest to those folks that are here in the construction trades, and others have focused on healthcare, on the construction trades, on security, on green jobs, and other places to get people to have the skills to long-term be able to employ themselves. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Perry, who I know has some questions as well.
Thank you. I submitted this motion and asked for a report back from CDD because I felt it was critically important that the city make every effort to improve accountability and ensure transparency when we're using Workforce Investment Act funds to make sure that they've been efficiently spent in areas of the city that have the greatest rates of unemployment. Now, we're all painfully aware of the reductions that have taken place over the last several years, the potential restructuring of the current Workforce Investment Act funds distribution may further impact the city in an adverse way in the next funding cycle. So I felt that it's very important for us to be anticipatory rather than reactionary to mitigate as much as possible impact to city residents. So I wanted to raise the following questions: job training for the chronically unemployed, the issue of capacity building and how we measure performance. Again, the issue of an RFP that hadn't been released in 14 years for new operators at WorkSource centers. The board has focused on job placement and not as much of an emphasis on job training. And while placement is a critical component of workforce development, preparing workers to be competitive and self-sustaining is a very high priority. So that is the basis upon which I did this. Now, this is my opinion that CDD is not being anticipatory enough and that we seem to be acting in a manner that the funding amount may not change. The dollar figures are going to change, and Congress is changing everything. And so I wanted to raise that pretense and say that I think that that is a flawed assumption. There's a lot of uncertainty. State legislation is going to also change state guidelines. So a couple of questions, and I can go through them. Let me just put them out there, and then we can go back through them again. Universal access goals addressed in the report. I want you to talk a bit about that. Your chart appears that the RFP may be designed to favor certain systems. WIB is providing funding along with requesting a match. Now, in some areas, communities don't have the same networks as others, where match funding can be easily found. Partnerships are harder to come by in some communities, but the building of partnerships should be emphasized since funding is clearly going to decrease. I'm arguing for a hold or just a wait on the release of the RFP because we don't know what the program's going to look like coming from the federal government. It's a lot of uncertainties. I don't even have the answers on the federal legislation and the funding changes, and we may not get them until January after the president is sworn in again. But I do know that we have to keep jobs here and that we have to build our skills here, manufacture the products here, and build our brain trust here. Now, if you look at the chart, broken down by council district, one of the things that struck me is that CD9 has 18% unemployment, but receives $1.1+ million. CD1 has 13% unemployment and receives $3.7 million. CD12 has half the unemployment rate of CD9 at 9%. And receives $1.3 million. This is very difficult to explain. I can't even explain that, the correlation between training and unemployment. But what it does scream out is that the money needs to go into communities that need it the most. And I think this is critical. I mentioned the federal legislation, state legislation, barriers for program providers in South Los Angeles. Unless we have an honest conversation about that, we're not going to make significant progress. And one side note, I think maybe Robert, you mentioned program providers and owning their own facilities. And if you will, I'm not aware that a lot of program providers actually own their own facilities. I suspect there are more that don't own their facilities than do. So if you could break that out for me, and if you need for me to go back over these questions, I can.
Let me take the chart one, and the chart is attachment A. And this really is the legacy of how we've been doing business over the last 14 years. And very much to your point on council, for your council district and CD9, where it has the less per or a ratio of dollars going into your council. That is exactly why we want to do this RFP. And we need to be able to realign the funding of the sources to where the unemployment comes
But
in.
let me just ask you, intervene. I don't understand, how did this disparity occur in the first place? Because it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Because, I mean, South Los Angeles has been underemployed for a long time.
right.
Yeah, for at least a decade, and even beyond that. And we're right next to Council District 1,
So most of our centers have had funding or have been in the system for well over 15 years since the last time it was done. We've reduced the size of the system from about 24 centers down to the 17 that we have now over the last 10 years, and that was by individual agencies not being able to perform or actually going out of business. But we've continued to fund the same centers, and their physical locations have not changed over the time. We've been funding it by planning areas, not necessarily council districts. And in the planning areas, for example, in South Los Angeles, and when you add CD8, CD9, CD10, CD15 because of Watts area, we do have 6 service centers that are there. What we didn't have is in one of the areas that we have the most amount of unemployment and poverty, which is in your district around Central Avenue. We had no physical location there. We actually opened up a satellite 2 years ago and to force resources into that area. But the current providers was just not covered. As a part of this, we will actually be, to my point earlier, equalizing the dollars and aligning them with where the need is, like we did with the youth source and as well as the family source. So where there's the highest unemployment and the highest folks on public assistance will get the highest amounts of both resources and number of centers that we would propose to be located there.
So contrast that with Chatsworth Northridge.
So
They actually got more money over the last, same time frame.
right, they've had it's a physical center there. They've established a partnership with EDD and the EDD facility that's been there and has been continuously to be funded over the last dozen plus years.
So when you get down to it, what are you saying? Is it the failure of operators to go into areas? I mean, we're supposed to be directing them and creating RFPs that create the opportunity for people to go in and establish themselves.
Exactly.
So it seems to be some sort of lack in the last decade of analysis that...
Exactly.
You're correct. Councilmember, what we did was we used the planning areas and we haven't changed anything. So in your particular case, we found from the new evidence in terms of unemployment and poverty, south of the Santa Monica, east of the Harbor Freeway, is one of the areas that's not really covered. We established a satellite, but that was it. So what you see before you was the creation of planning areas, the 7 planning areas. We have not adjusted anything in all these years. Hence, that's why we're going out. We need to deal with some of these issues in terms of where unemployment is and where poverty is. You're not going to have that movement unless we can bid it out.
No, I understand that, but again, the president's going to get sworn in again, and things are going to change. And I don't know how you plan without understanding the direction the federal government is going to take so that you can allocate and actually correct the balance and to be equitable this time around to make up for the past inequities that this framework has created.
Well, we actually know where the president's going. The innovation fund that the Secretary of Labor has grown phenomenally. There was not an innovation fund. What they did was, actually, there's been some dissatisfaction with the system nationally to the point where the administration diverted money into an innovation account. And that innovation account has been used to try new methods of service delivery. Only recently, 3 weeks ago, Congress attempted to block grant all of the money to the governors. So there is a call nationally for a change in this system. There's going to be a focus in this administration, as we know, because that was the focus in the last one, to send more money to community colleges with an emphasis on training, and therefore we have to adjust. We know there's dissatisfaction with the system, again, because even the Secretary has established innovation accounts to allow us to compete. There is a new movement also to return discretionary money to the governors, so that there will be some discretion in states to engage in innovation activities.
But, and at the end of the day, you don't know exactly where they're going to land, so you don't know the extent of, the amount of money we're going to have to work with.
I'll concede that.
Yeah.
I think over the past 14 years, and as much as the legislation expired the first 5 years, we've always been on pins and needles trying to figure it out. Sometimes it's just merely putting our finger up in the wind. But we've done that for, what, 9 years since the legislation expired.
Well,
Councilwoman, as part of the RFP process, this will really just be the first step of going back out, and we will be coming back to this chamber with recommendations. And at that point, we will know in terms of what the federal funding looks like. We'll also be able to present to you the hard evidence of additional partnerships, additional resources that we could bring to you. If we don't bring you back a system that makes sense to you, if we don't bring you back a system at that time that is better than what we currently have, this body can reject our recommendations, and we can continue as we have, as we are now. Without us attempting to try to build a better system and try to forge these greater partnerships, we can actually improve the system for what we need.
your language has to reflect the reality that some communities don't have the same capacity as others to build partnerships. Your language should also reflect the fact that there is some uncertainty at the federal level as to how much will be allocated and what the pool of money, the extent of pool of money that we would be able to compete, so that we can give people, and be fair about it, give them a fair chance to compete with language that provides a level playing field. Otherwise, we could end up in the same situation we are in now and that we've been in for the last 10 years. And I understand that you want to update now. I do understand that, and I respect that. And I'm just trying to be realistic so that we don't have to constantly play catch-up and then to give people false expectations and then find out subsequent to that when we know darn well that the trend is to cut and reduce, that they're going to get money, that they're going to be able to compete for money that isn't going to be there.
Right. And our emphasis has really been about seeking and finding the additional resources. It's about bringing the partnerships together and the department taking more of a leadership role in forging those partnerships. The Community College District is a great example. The agencies that don't have that same type of capacity to forge those partnerships, the department and the WIB needs to step in and to assist and to have system-wide agreements.
But the only thing that will matter is the RFP. I understand your philosophy, but the only thing that matters is the language that goes into the RFP.
And we can adjust that.
Yeah, that's all that matters, because that's how you're going to judge people who submit and want to compete. There's no other measure.
Okay. We have 8 cards. It was 2 when I started, so it's a popular and growing subject. We do have one other item, so I'm going to do 10 minutes of public comment on this. So if we can keep your comments to about a minute and a half. We're going to run the clock at a minute, but take some little extra time if you need to add another 30 seconds or so. But David Cunningham, former council member and great city leader, is our first speaker. Carrie Doy is our second speaker after Mr. Cunningham.
Good job.
Thank you, sir.
So, this is kind of going hand in hand with some of your comments.
Should I just speak from here?
Oh, sorry. You can come by the ropes. You can go ahead and move that. The sergeants at arms can assist us to allow our speakers through. Thank you.
I am not Dave Cunningham.
You don't look like him.
He's much better looking.
Go ahead. You go first, Mr.
Thank you
David.
very
Go
much.
ahead.
I guess a couple of things that are also very important in addition to the discussion is that the fiscal cliff, the sword drops on January 2nd. Everybody in D.C. is really concerned. That's why the president wants to make a very big effort to try to do something during this lame duck session. One of the things he just announced last Monday was a 3-to-1 formula. For every $3 in cuts, there would be $1 in new revenue. That puts out a signal to to the entire workforce development community, including the National Skills Coalition, that we could be facing devastating cuts in addition to the $630 billion that was already lost. In addition to that, Chairman Klein and the chairman of the House Education Workforce Committee said that workforce development is going to be his #1 priority and will take up the Fox Bill 4297 as soon as Congress reconvenes. That Fox bill has been sanctioned on the Senate side by the incoming ranking Republican Senator Lamar Alexander as saying that's something that he would support. We need to understand that it was authored by the Tea Party member Virginia Fox, which means that everything is up for grabs.
Thank you. If I can ask you to conclude.
It appears as though Senator Harkin, that's chairing the committee, is going to have to reach some kind of compromise with the House as well as the ranking member to be able to see what's going to come up. Worst case scenario is that like in 1981 we had the cuts were so big that we had a 30-day notice to close up shop.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. David Cunningham, and then Sophia Esparza will be next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Speaking on behalf of many of the members of the Workforce Center, they do not fear competition. The devil is in the rules that are going to be utilized through the RFP process. And what will you get points for? For instance, will they retain the right for the local preference? Will they get points for that? It's been contained in the past. Those rules have been used in the past. There are many other rules that are of serious consideration to them. One of the concerns, how do you define a partnership? Who's going to define partnerships? What are going to be the criteria for partnerships? Will they spell them out in the RFP clearly so that they can respond to them? Those are just a few of the questions that I would raise, and others will raise the others. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. Sophia Esparza is next, and after that is Tom Bice. Good morning.
Thank you very much. I think that Mr. Baez was going to bequeath his time to me for just because the points are a little bit longer.
Okay, we'll give you 2 minutes, but we can't really yield time.
Okay, very good.
You got it. We'll take you up to 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. The point that I think that the councilwoman raised were really valid and important points, and that is the issue of the $600,000 that is going to be leveraged. First and foremost, I think that all of the WorkSource centers we've met, we understand and we believe in fair competition. We understand that procurement has to occur. However, we believe that the devil is in the details, and the details in terms of the RFP is what concerns us in terms of really providing us an opportunity for a fair level playing field. Earlier we had our leadership from CDD speak to the fact that we needed to be able to find space and go into certain areas. Give you an example. We have an issue that we don't have enough infrastructure.
One more minute.
And on the $600,000 of leverage funds, we understand that it's really very critical that we raise the funds. As nonprofits, we do that. But we don't know what base year was used to determine or how the aggregate came up for $600,000 being the average. And as was stated, some of us are more competitive and sexier when we're going out to seek for funds versus others. And that's really a concern in terms of how we're going to do that to bring those resources into those communities that are really needed. We would really want the match to not be a hard cash dollar match, but to really allow us to do the leveraging through the partnerships and assist us with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, and thank you for that feedback. We have Magdalena Duran is our next speaker, and then Angela Scott Hill. You can just move that over. Can we move that just for now, for the comments? If we can move that just so people have access, thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like I just saw you.
Yes.
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you as well. There are some issues that Councilwoman raised that are also important to us. as an organization. One of them is that things have changed in what we see in the RFP. We are now talking about where in the past workforce centers were not allowed to also be the training institutions. There is now a change in that, and it was always seemed to be a conflict of interest if you were a trainer and also the lead workforce center. It's a positive thing if that's how we're going to go with it, but it is a question mark about why things are changing so quickly when we have had one in California, LA City has been the delivery of workforce services, including innovation and sector. We have moved our programs to whatever is coming for many years. We have been the top performer for the state of California to ensure that the contract to DOL was met. So some of the details that are being thrown at us about the changes that are going to come with this RFP are a little bit puzzling, and I just gave you an example of one. The other one, Councilman Cunningham mentioned, it's the preference for local, higher local companies. Why is that being tossed? So there are several things that I think require a lot of clarity and definition so that we are indeed improving our system. And definitely, we don't know what's coming down the pipeline, so I think we need to wait a bit.
Thank you very much. Angela Scott Hill is next. After that is Corinne Sanchez.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I also would like to piggyback off of Mr. Cunningham. He had made mention regarding the partnerships and for the system to actually find out what the true definition of the partnership would be prior to the RFP's release. Well, we would like to make sure that partnerships aren't imposed on the contracts that are executed after the RFP is all finished and said and done, because what we would like to do is to find out if there are mandatory partners that you guys would like us to have, or if we are able to seek out, solidify, and continue to maintain the partnerships that we have to ensure that our services are served to the best of our abilities.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Corinne Sanchez, and then Sandra Davis. Good to see you as well.
Good morning, council members. Corinne Sanchez, CEO, President of El Proyecto del Barrio, San Fernando Valley, and also co-chair of the Southern California Workforce Partnership. We're very concerned. It's been brought up several times. They're out to close down workforce centers, and that means there'll be less representation for the constituents and residents in the city of Los Angeles. Our concern has been the basis of that. And so it's really important that factual and objective material and information is utilized to ensure that workforce centers are throughout the city of Los Angeles and do serve the very population that we have been serving over 20 years. There's been talk of mergers or merging partnerships throughout the city. Unfortunately, there's been forced marriages instituted in the past. What that means is we have natural alliances and relationships. We wish that to continue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corinne. And Sandra, you're our last speaker.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I first wanted to say that Councilwoman Perry made such an intuitive point of reference when she said, and I'm paraphrasing, that all areas are not created equal. And I happen to be in one of those areas, so I can truly speak to that. But this morning I want to speak about the CAPE certification. The City of Los Angeles and CDD invested millions and has determined that CAPE, the Malcolm Baldrige certification, requisite to be a valuable asset in setting a high standard for operators. And what we're concerned about is that we were mandated to become certified by CAPE, and now we're understanding that they're dropping that in the RFP and that there's no mandate for certifications to happen for the new operators that are applying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That'll close the public comment. This item was put before us as a request for information, so not for one of action. But what I'd like to do is, wait, Marcel, when is this scheduled for council? Do we have it scheduled yet? It's not scheduled. Okay. The recommendation, and obviously when we take in information, is to note and file that. I think we should do that today. But I would like to have clarity on the issues that were brought up by our workforce centers, specifically the definition of partnerships and some clarity on that when it comes to council, so we can get some answers between now and then on whether local preference is going to be included. Obviously, you have to design this. We can't just have it written from the outside in, and I think people can appreciate that, but also I think these are legitimate questions. Also, whether there's a conflict between folks doing training and being the main recipients of the dollars, or whether you don't see that as a conflict, to answer that question. And also where you're going to put this in terms of the need. Obviously, if we have 17 centers at 1.7 million, what we don't want to do is spread this evenly around the city, because that's not necessarily where the need is. It's not currently done that way either right now. So while we can say we need more here, more there, we can look at different unemployment rates. Just doing some of the math right here, when you look at South LA, when you look at Central Los Angeles and East Los Angeles, when you look at the San Fernando Valley, I think there's been some attempt, but it's been 14 years since we've really looked at that carefully. And what we can do to make sure that we aren't just going to be sticking 1.7, 1.7, 1.7 in a geographically even way, but that doesn't mirror where the unemployment rate is, and how you're going to ask the recipients of these to be cognizant of that, because I certainly want to see those dollars going where the need is. We do face a time of uncertainty. We don't know what the federal funding is going to be, but I think we've never known that, and we've been in a place of immense insecurity. We have to move forward with an assumption that we will have some funding. If we don't, we will revisit that and look at what happens, and I think you can change the numbers, which we'd have to do even if we didn't do an RFP and we kept it today the way it is. We'd be facing the exact same challenge. So it's not unique to whether we go to an RFP or not, but I do take the suggestions and the criticisms. I met with a number of the workforce development providers, and I think it's a legitimate fear, but let us redouble our efforts to make sure, and I certainly will take a very active role with this administration at that. There's worst case scenarios with, if Republicans controlled everything, and there's better case scenarios in a split government, and there's the best case scenario, which we're not going to have. But somewhere in between that, I think we can move forward with something which for 14 years we haven't necessarily. But I want to make sure we have those questions answered before. But just to be clear, what's before us today, folks, is we don't have anything that we are either authorizing or not authorizing the RFP to move forward. That's separate. This motion was a request for report back for information, so we need to note and file that. But it's going to come to the council also for that, and I'd like to have that information so that we don't have to introduce a motion to halt the process where it is necessarily, but see if we can get some of the answers that people legitimately raised. Okay.
Just one point of clarification. As a department, we do not believe that we'll be coming in with a drastically less number of centers. So we do believe that we have to cover the city of Los Angeles, and we have currently 17. Is that the exact right number? We don't know until we do that analysis, and also on the funding, but we do not believe it coming in with a drastically smaller number that has been out there and kind of rumored to be cut drastically. So I just want to make that as a point of clarification. Also to put at ease both our contractors as well as the council offices. Okay. And then the rest of the information we'll provide when it comes to council next week.
Okay. Mr. Parks?
I'd just like to ask, first of all, on the several comments that Ms. Perry made, if we can get a report back on her concerns. The other issue, just in general, and I realize this is just information, what my number one concern is that we've had 14 years of somewhat static involvement with the process from the federal government. At the end of the 14 years, we have some major disparity as to how funds are dispersed.
Right.
So it complicates for me the idea that we're now going to go out for an RFP with even less information than we've been able to gather in the 14-year history, with new administration, potential less money, a variety of things that we have no knowledge about. And as we know with the RFP, we're somewhat stuck with the writing in the RFP, even if the program doesn't match when it finally comes out. Mm-hmm. And then that causes us to go out with another RFP and delay the process. So I would encourage us to find additional information or wait until we have some security, because if there's any indication of our last 14 years, we kind of missed the point in dispersal of funds. I think the other thing I'd ask you to look at, and I realize we want to cover the whole city, but every time we make a decision of a workforce center being cited, that's a dollar value, whether that area is worthy of that amount of money. You need so much money to open the doors and close the doors. So if you stuck with 17, you've just about made a decision that we're going to evenly disperse the funds versus going by need. And so I think we need to look at that of whether you should merge some sites or you should be